Not by intelligence, not by culture, not by the beauty of their homeworlds or the poetry of their languages. The galaxy sorted by teeth, by claws, by the tonnage of warships parked in orbit and the willingness to use them. Humanity had none of these things, or rather humanity had so little of these things that the difference between having them and not having them was a rounding error. 47 colony worlds, a defensive fleet that could generously be called adequate, no enslaved species, no conquered territories, no history of orbital bombardment. In the math of the Galactic Dominion, this made humans a footnote. Ambassador Elara Voss knew all of this as her shuttle drifted toward Thrax's station, the beating heart of Dominion governance. Only a structure so large it had its own weather systems and so old that entire civilizations had risen and collapsed since its first corridor was welded into place. She sat in the back of the diplomatic shuttle with her hands flat on her thighs and her spine pressed hard against the seat like she was trying to fuse with it. She was 43 years old, brown hair cut short because she could not be bothered with it, a face that had been called plain by people who did not look closely enough and striking by people who did. She wore the dark blue formal suit of Earth's diplomatic corps, and pinned to her left lapel was a small silver circle, the emblem of her homeworld. Just a circle. No eagle, no sword, no predator with bared teeth. A circle. And the other species had found this hilarious when humanity first showed up on the galactic stage 11 years ago. Her aide, Commander Rourke, sat across from her. He was built like a man who had been assembled from spare military parts. Wide shoulders, jaw like a shelf, eyes that tracked movement the way anti-aircraft systems tracked incoming ordnance. He had not spoken in 40 minutes. This was because he had nothing to say, and Rourke was the kind of man who treated silence like a natural resource he refused to waste. The shuttle passed through the outer defense ring of Thrax's station. Elara counted the weapons platforms, 48, each one capable of turning a small moon into gravel. She looked at Rourke. How many of those are pointed at us right now? He did not look up from his datapad. All of them, Ambassador. Lovely. The shuttle docked. The airlock hissed. The smell hit first, recycled air that had been breathed by 10,000 species and carried the faint chemical tang of atmospheric scrubbers working overtime. Thrax's station smelled like a hospital waiting room the size of a continent. Their escort was already waiting. 4 Vraxian soldiers in black armor that looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured, with helmets that hid everything except their eyes. Pale yellow, slit-pupiled, cold as winter on a world that had never heard of spring. The Vraxians were the top of the food chain, 7 feet tall on average, scaled skin in shades of dark gray and deep blue, 4 arms, 2 legs, a skeletal structure that made them functionally impossible to wrestle, grapple, or pin down. And they had conquered 62 species in the last 1,000 years. They ran the Dominion the way a landlord runs a building, with just enough maintenance to prevent collapse and just enough threat to prevent complaint. The lead soldier looked down at Elara. Way down. Ambassador Voss, that's me. You will follow. Love the hospitality. Rourke's hand twitched at his side, not toward a weapon. He was not carrying one. No human was permitted weapons on Thrax's station. His hand twitched because his body remembered what it was like to reach for something that was not there, and the absence of it made his fingers itch like a phantom limb. They walked. The corridors of Thrax's station were built for Vraxian proportions, which meant the ceilings were high enough to echo and the doorways were wide enough for 4 humans to walk abreast. Everything was gray metal and pale blue lighting. No art, no decoration, no windows. The Vraxians did not believe in beauty as an architecture. They believed in function and the fear that function implied. Other species watched them pass. A cluster of Elani, small, insectoid, translucent, pressed themselves against the wall as the Vraxian escort moved through. A pair of Torvathi merchants, 8-legged and heavily furred, stopped their conversation and stared at the humans with something that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. It was hard to tell with Torvathi. Their faces did not move the way human faces moved. Elara kept her eyes forward. She had been briefed. She had been briefed so thoroughly that the briefing documents printed out would have required their own shuttle. She knew the names of every Dominion Council member. She knew their political alignments, their personal grudges, their mating histories, and their preferred methods of execution for enemies. She knew the floor plan of the council chamber. She knew where the exits were. She knew there were no exits. Not really. Not for humans. Not here. The council chamber was a vast circular room with tiered seating that rose in concentric rings around a central platform. The petitioner's floor. The design was intentional. Anyone who stood on that floor was surrounded, looked down upon, small. Elora stepped onto it and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. The council was already seated. 12 species, 12 delegations. 8, but only one mattered. High Commander Dravik of the Vraxian Empire sat at the apex of the highest tier, directly across from the entrance, positioned so that every petitioner who entered would see him first and see him last. He was old by Vraxian standards, which meant he had survived long enough to kill everyone who had tried to replace him. His scales had faded to a pale silver gray, and his 4 arms rested on the armrests of his seat with the casual weight of someone who had not been afraid of anything in a very long time. He looked at Alara the way a man looks at a fly that has landed on his dinner plate, not with anger, not with hate, with mild inconvenience. "Ambassador Voss," he said. His voice filled the chamber without effort. Vraxian vocal cords were built for carrying across battlefields, but even his conversational tone sounded like a command. "You have requested an audience to discuss the matter of your border colonies." "I have. You have 5 minutes." Ilara looked at him. She looked at the council. She looked at the translators embedded in every seat, carrying her words to 1,000 ears in 100 languages. She looked at the recording devices. This would be broadcast. They always broadcast these things. The Dominion liked the galaxy to see how petitions went. It discouraged future petitions. She took a breath. "In the last 14 months," she said, "Vraxian military vessels have entered sovereign human space on 9 separate occasions. They have established forward operating bases on 3 worlds within our recognized borders. They have displaced human colonial populations, totaling 11,000 people. With 2 of those displacements involved the use of force. 47 human citizens are dead." She paused, not for effect. She paused because the number still had weight for her, and she needed a moment to carry it. "We have filed formal protests through every available diplomatic channel. We have filed 9. We have received 0 responses." A murmur rippled through the lower tiers. Not surprise, amusement. A few of the smaller delegations exchanged glances that said the same thing. "Oh, the little ones are complaining again." Dravik did not react. He sat motionless, patient, the patience of a predator who did not need to chase because the prey always came to him. "I am here," Ilara said, "to deliver a message from Earth's United Council. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a warning." The chamber went quiet. Well, not the quiet of attention, the quiet of disbelief. A Vraxian sub-commander in the 2nd tier barked a laugh. It sounded like 2 rocks being struck together. Ilara ignored it. "Withdraw your forces from human space within 30 standard days. Return our displaced citizens. Compensate the families of the dead. If these terms are not met, Earth will consider the Vraxian Empire to be in a state of open war with humanity, and we will respond accordingly." Silence, then laughter. It started with the Vraxians and spread outward like a wave, rolling through the tiers of the council chamber until the entire room shook with it. Not all species laughed the same way. The Alani clicked, the Torvathi rumbled, the Kashiri whistled. But the message was the same. 47 colony worlds threatening the largest military empire the galaxy had ever produced. Ilara stood on the petitioner's floor and waited. She did not flinch. She did not blush. She did not look away. She had known this would happen. She had been told in the briefing room on Earth 6 weeks ago that this was the most likely outcome. She had been told what came after, too. She had accepted the assignment anyway. Dravik raised one of his 4 arms. The laughter stopped, not gradually. It stopped like a switch had been thrown. The Dominion was well trained. "Ambassador Voss," His voice carried the residue of amusement, the way a blade carries the residue of oil. I appreciate your species' courage. It is an admirable quality in small creatures. But I must ask, do you understand what you are saying? Perfectly. You represent a species that has existed on the galactic stage for 11 years. You have no dreadnoughts, you have no planetary siege weapons, you have no history of interstellar warfare. Your total military capacity would not survive first contact with a single Varaxian battle group. He leaned forward. And you stand here and speak to me of war. I do. Then you are either very brave or very foolish. I've been told those are the same thing where I come from. Dravik studied her. Something shifted behind those yellow eyes. Not respect. That was too much to ask. But something. A flicker. The recognition that this small creature on the floor below him was not performing courage. She was holding it like a weapon, and she was holding it steady. Yana, your warning is noted, he said. It is also rejected. The territories in question are now under Varaxian jurisdiction. Your colonies will be relocated. If they resist, they will be removed. This is the order of the Dominion, and it is final. Ilara nodded, slowly. Then I have one more thing to say, and I want to be certain the recording devices capture it clearly. She looked directly into the nearest broadcast lens. To the people of Earth, to every human being listening to this, I was sent here to offer peace. It has been refused. What comes next is not my decision. It is yours. But I want you to know, I am proud to have stood here. I am proud to have spoken for you. Whatever they do to me now, I need you to remember something. Dravik's eyes narrowed. Cool, we warned them. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was the silence of a room that has realized something is happening that was not in the script. Dravik stood, all 7 feet of him unfolded from that chair, like a monument deciding to take a walk, and the chamber seemed to shrink around him. What did you just say? Ilara met his gaze. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs the way she had on the shuttle, and she held. I said we warned you. You presume to threaten this council? No, High Commander. I presume to tell the truth. What your council does with it is your business. What my people do with your answer is theirs. Dravik descended, step by step, tier by tier, until he stood on the petitioner's floor. He towered over her. His shadow swallowed her whole. Rourke was so hard the muscle jumped. Dravik reached so hard the muscle jumped. Dravik reached down with one of his lower arms and took the silver circle from Ilara's lapel. He held it up, turned it in the light. A circle, he said. Your species chose a circle as its symbol. No weapons, no predators, no teeth. It represents a planet, Ilara said. It represents nothing. He closed his fist. The pin crumpled. As will your species, Ambassador, if you continue down this path. He dropped the ruined pin at her feet. Escort the human delegation back to their shuttle. Their diplomatic credentials are revoked. They have 12 hours to leave Dominion space. Ilara bent down. When you're from above, a Varaxian pulse weapon from above. A Varaxian pulse weapon, standard military issue, fired from the 2nd tier by a soldier whose name would never be recorded in any official document. The bolt struck Ilara in the center of her back, and she dropped like someone had cut her strings. Rourke moved. He moved with the speed of a man who had spent 20 years in special operations and whose body did not need permission from his brain to react. He covered 4 meters in less than a second and was on his knees beside her before her body had finished falling. She was still alive. Barely. The pulse had burned through her spine and cooked everything behind her rib cage. She had seconds. Her hand found Rourke's. Her fingers wrapped around his, weak, trembling, and she pulled him close. She whispered something. 2 words. Rourke heard them. His face did not change. His face went to a place beyond expression, a place where grief and fury had merged into something that had no name in any human language. Ilara Voss died on the petitioner's floor of the Dominion Council chamber, in front of 1,000 delegates in a live galactic broadcast, with a crushed silver circle in her pocket and 2 unrecorded words on her lips. Rourke stood. He lifted her body. He carried her back to the shuttle. No one stopped him. The Varaxian guards watched. The council watched. Dravik watched. None of them stopped him because none of them were afraid. Not yet. The shuttle departed Thrax's station at 1400 Galactic Standard Time. It crossed the outer defense ring. It passed the 48 weapons platforms. It entered open space and set course for Earth. 12 hours later, every human communication relay in the galaxy went dark. Every embassy closed. Every trade route shut down. Every human ship recalled. Earth went silent. The galaxy barely noticed. A few trade partners filed complaints about disrupted supply chains. A Torvathi merchant guild sent inquiries about overdue shipments. The Alani Collective expressed mild concern through diplomatic backchannels. The Varaxians noticed least of all. They had more important things to attend to. A species with 47 colony worlds and no dreadnoughts had been put in its place. The ambassador had been made an example. The message was clear. There was nothing left to discuss. Dravik returned to his command center. Once he reviewed fleet deployments, he approved the next phase of expansion into human-claimed territory. He signed orders for the permanent military occupation of 3 more human colony worlds. He did not think about Ilara Voss. He did not think about the 2 words she had whispered. He did not think about the silence. 3 weeks passed. The Varaxian 4th Fleet, 12 warships, 2 carriers, 800 crew, entered the Kepler Corridor, a stretch of space that bordered human territory. Their mission was routine: occupy, establish, pacify. They sent their standard arrival broadcast on all frequencies. No one answered. They moved deeper into the corridor. Sensors showed nothing. No ships, no stations, no orbital defenses. The human colonies in the region appeared to have been evacuated. Buildings stood empty. Ports sat vacant. And there was a signal, faint, coming from the stars. There was a signal, faint, coming from the far edge of the corridor. Not a distress call, not a beacon, a recording. On loop, Torath ordered it played. The bridge speakers crackled. A voice, human, female. "We warned you." Then every sensor on every ship in the 4th Fleet lit up at once, and the corridor filled with light. And Sub-Admiral Torath had exactly 1.5 seconds to understand what the silence had meant before the silence took him too. The 4th Fleet was never heard from again. On Earth, in a room buried deep beneath a mountain that had no name on any map, a woman with gray hair and steady hands looked at a screen that showed the Kepler corridor. She turned to the room full of officers behind her. "That's confirmed," she said. "They received the warning. They didn't listen." She straightened in her chair. "Begin." The galaxy ran on gossip the way engines ran on fuel. Inefficiently, constantly, and with a remarkable tendency to explode at the worst possible moment. The disappearance of the Varaxian 4th Fleet was not gossip. It was a hole in the fabric of galactic conversation. And holes were worse than gossip because people filled them with their own fears. Trade Minister Yelik of the Torvathi Merchant Guild was the first non-Varaxian official to notice something was wrong. Yelik was a creature of numbers: 8 legs, 4 eyes, and a brain that processed profit margins the way other brains processed oxygen, automatically, constantly, and with deep personal distress when the supply was interrupted. He sat in his office on Torvathi Prime, staring at a shipping manifest that had a blank space where the 4th Fleet's patrol confirmation should have been. "They're late," he said to his assistant. "By how much?" 11 days. His assistant, a younger Torvathi named Bryn, shifted on her legs. "All 8 of them. Varaxian fleets are never late." "I am aware." "Should we inquire?" Yelik looked at the manifest. He looked at the trade routes that ran through the Kepler corridor, routes that carried raw materials worth more than the annual output of 6 minor species combined. He looked at the empty column where arrival timestamps should have been. "No," he said. We should not inquire. We should listen, and we should listen very carefully to what we do not hear." On Thrax's station, High Commander Dravik was doing something he had not done in decades. He was waiting. Varaxians did not wait. Waiting implied uncertainty, and uncertainty implied weakness. And weakness was a resource the Varaxian Empire had eliminated from its vocabulary 3,000 years ago, along with the species that had tried to teach it to them. But Dravik was waiting because the 4th Fleet had not reported in, and the 4th Fleet always reported in, and the absence of their report was a sound he could not identify. It was like hearing a note missing from a song he had listened to his entire life. He stood at the command display in his private war room aboard Thrax's station. The display showed the galaxy, a sprawling, glittering map of territories and borders and fleet positions, color-coded by allegiance. Vraxian space was rendered in deep blue. It covered nearly a third of the known galaxy. The blue was so dominant that other colors looked like accidents, stains on a clean surface. Human space was gray, a small smudge near the galactic rim. 47 worlds, barely visible at this scale. The Kepler corridor sat between the two colors, and on the display, the Fourth Fleet's position marker had gone from active blue to inactive black. Black meant no signal, no transponder, no life signs. Druvik's second-in-command, Fleet Admiral Korath, stood behind him. Korath was younger, sharper, and possessed the particular kind of ambition that made him dangerous to everyone, including himself. For he had 4 scars running down the left side of his face, 3 from combat, 1 from politics. He did not specify which was which. Equipment failure, Korath said. The Kepler corridor has high-density radiation pockets. It could interfere with transponders. All 12 ships? Korath did not answer. All 12 ships, Korath. 2 carriers, 800 crew, every transponder, every backup, every emergency beacon, all dark, simultaneously. The alternative, High Commander, is that they were destroyed. Yes, by the humans. Yes. Korath let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. The humans do not have the capability to destroy a patrol fleet. Their entire navy could not match our Fourth Fleet ship for ship. Druvik said nothing. He stared at the black dot on the display. He was thinking about the ambassador, the woman who had stood on the petitioner's floor with shaking hands and a steady voice, and said words that no species with 47 worlds and no dreadnoughts had any right to say. We warned you. He had killed her for it. Not personally. He had not given the order, though he had not punished the soldier who fired, which amounted to the same thing in the mathematics of power. He had killed her because her words were an insult, and insults from lesser species could not be permitted to stand. This was doctrine. This was tradition. This was how the Dominion maintained order. But he was thinking about her face. The moment before the shot, she had not been afraid. He had seen fear in 1,000 species. He knew its variations the way a painter knows shades of red. The Alani trembled. The Kashiri went rigid. The Torvathi curled inward. Every species had its signature, and Dravik had cataloged them all. The human ambassador had not been afraid. She had been sad. The distinction bothered him in a place he could not name. Send the 9th Fleet, he said. Full combat deployment. Find out what happened in the Kepler corridor. Korath straightened. The 9th Fleet is one of our largest battle groups. 32 ships. For a reconnaissance mission? I did not say reconnaissance. I said full combat deployment. Against humans. Dravik turned from the display. He looked at Korath with eyes that had watched empires fold. Against whatever is in that corridor. The 9th Fleet departed Vraxian staging grounds 4 days later. 32 warships, 4 dreadnoughts, 12,000 crew. On enough firepower to crack a planet's crust and enough soldiers to occupy whatever was left. They entered the Kepler corridor in standard combat formation. Dreadnoughts at the center, heavy cruisers on the flanks, destroyers running point. Their sensors were at maximum range. Their weapons were hot, their shields were up. Fleet Commander Voxan was a veteran of 11 campaigns and the destruction of 2 species that had made the mistake of resisting Vraxian expansion. She was considered one of the finest tactical minds in the Empire. She had never lost a battle. She had never even come close. She sat in the command chair of her flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, and watched the corridor unfold on her tactical display. Empty, dark. The stars out here were thin and scattered, and the space between them felt wider than it should. And the scan results, she said. Nothing, Commander. No ships, no stations, no orbital infrastructure. The human colonies in this sector have been completely evacuated. Debris? Scanning. A pause. There is debris, Commander. Vraxian alloy signatures. scattered across a region approximately 400,000 kilometers wide. Voxan leaned forward. The Fourth Fleet? Confirmed. Hull fragments consistent with Vraxian warship construction. We are also detecting... The sensor officer stopped. His scales shifted color, a pale wash that meant something was wrong with his body's ability to process what his instruments were telling him. Detecting what? The debris is pulverized, Commander. Not broken, not breached, pulverized. The largest fragment is less than 2 meters across. And whatever did this reduced 12 warships to particles. The bridge went silent. Not the trained silence of military discipline. The raw silence of creatures confronting something that did not fit inside the architecture of their understanding. Voxan's tactical officer spoke. Commander, I'm detecting the same signal the Fourth Fleet reported before contact was lost. A looped recording. Human origin. Play it! The bridge speakers crackled. The same voice. The same 2 words. We warned you! Voxan opened her mouth to give an order. She never finished. The first shot came from nowhere. Not from a ship, not from a station, not from any direction the sensors could identify. It came from the fabric of the corridor itself, as though the darkness between the stars had learned to bite. And it struck the lead destroyer amidships with a beam of energy so dense that the ship did not explode. It collapsed, folded inward like a paper ball being crushed in a fist. Then the second shot, the third, the fourth. Evasive! All ships evasive! Voxan roared. The fleet scattered. 32 ships breaking formation, engines at maximum burn, weapons firing into the dark at targets they could not see. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds and particle beams lit up the corridor in a mad constellation of firepower aimed at nothing. The shots kept coming. They came from angles that were impossible. They came from behind ships that had nothing behind them. They came from above and below in a dimension that space did not have. Each one struck with surgical precision. Engines first, then weapons, then life support. Not random, methodical. The work of something that was not panicking, not improvising, not reacting. Hunting. Voxan watched her fleet die on the tactical display. Ship after ship went from blue to black. The dreadnoughts lasted longer. Their shields held for almost 90 seconds before the beams cut through. But they died the same way, folding, collapsing, going dark. Get me a target, she said. Her voice was controlled. Even the voice of a woman who had decided that if she was going to die, she was going to die doing her job. Anything. Give me something to shoot. Commander, there's nothing on sensors. Whatever is firing at us is not registering on any detection system we have. That's impossible. Yes, Commander. A beam hit the Dominion's wrath. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered. The hull screamed. A sound that metal makes when it is being asked to do something metal cannot do. Hull breach. Decks 7 through 12. Shields at 14%. Voxan looked at her display. Of 32 ships, 9 remained. 8. 7. The numbers felt like a countdown. Open a channel, she said. All frequencies. Unencrypted. Channel open. This is Fleet Commander Voxan of the Vraxian 9th Fleet. I am addressing the human forces in the Kepler corridor. We acknowledge your military presence. I am requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms. Silence. Another ship died. 6 remaining. I repeat, ceasefire request. We are willing to negotiate. The speakers crackled. A voice, human, male, calm in the way that deep water is calm. Not because there is no current, but because the current is so far down that the surface cannot feel it. Fleet Commander Voxan, this is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy. Your ceasefire request is noted. Then ceasefire. I'm afraid I can't do that. Another ship. 5 remaining. Voxan's claws dug into the armrests of her chair. We are prepared to withdraw. Fully. Immediately. We will leave the corridor. The corridor is not the issue, Fleet Commander. Then what is the issue? A pause. The kind of pause that carries weight. You killed our ambassador. That was not my decision. That was not my fleet. I had no part in... You are Vraxian military. Your empire killed our ambassador on a live broadcast in front of the entire galaxy. You used her death as a message. Another pause. We received it. 4 ships. 3. Admiral, please. Fleet Commander, I want to be clear about something. We are not angry. Anger fades. What we are is something your species doesn't have a word for, because you have never had to develop one. You have never been the small thing. You have never watched your people be killed by something larger and known you couldn't stop it. You have never buried your dead and been laughed at for mourning them. 2 ships, the Dominion's Wrath was one of them. We have a word for it though. In English, the closest translation is resolve, but that doesn't capture it fully. It's resolve mixed with patience, mixed with memory, mixed with the understanding that the universe doesn't care about fairness, and so fairness must be built by those willing to bleed for it. The other ship vanished from the display. 1 ship, the Dominion's Wrath. Era alone. Your fleet is destroyed, Commander. Your ship is the last one standing, and I have left it standing deliberately. I need you to survive. I need you to go back to Thrax's station, and I need you to deliver a message to High Commander Dravik. Voxen's scales had gone white, not from fear, past fear. Her body had run out of the chemicals required to sustain it, and had entered a state that Vraxian biology reserved for terminal situations. A cold, clear, empty awareness. What message? Tell him that was the first. Tell him there will not be a third warning. Tell him Earth is coming, and when we arrive, we will not be sending ambassadors. The channel went silent. The Dominion's Wrath drifted in the dark, surrounded by the pulverized remains of 32 warships and 12,000 Vraxian soldiers. Anatan Fleet Commander Voxan sat in her chair and breathed and did not move for a long time. Then she ordered a course for Thrax's station. The journey took 6 days. In those 6 days, the galaxy changed. Not visibly, not in the way that wars usually announce themselves, with explosions and headlines and refugee convoys streaming across borders. The galaxy changed the way a patient changes when the doctor's face goes wrong. Something in the air, something in the silences between transmissions, something in the way the Alani stopped answering trade hails, and the Torvathi began quietly rerouting shipping lanes away from anything that bordered human space. Trade Minister Yellick noticed. He noticed because the numbers told him, and numbers did not lie, and the numbers were saying that money was flowing away from the Vraxian side of the galaxy like water draining from a cracked pool. He called an emergency session of the Merchant Guild. Something has happened in the Kepler corridor, he said. I do not know precisely what, but 2 Vraxian fleets have entered that corridor, and neither has returned. The humans have gone completely silent. Every human trade relationship, every human diplomatic channel, every human cultural exchange in the galaxy has been terminated. They have withdrawn entirely. Withdrawn where, Matt Bryn? Home. Why? Yellick looked at his assistant with all 4 eyes. Because they are not traders anymore, Bryn. They are not diplomats. They are not colonists. He paused. They are something else now. And I do not want to be standing in the corridor when we find out what. On the other side of the galaxy, on a world called Threshold that sat at the edge of human space like a door left ajar, something was happening that the galaxy's sensors could not detect because the galaxy had never thought to look for it. Factories. Thousands of them. Not on the surface. Underground, buried beneath kilometers of rock and ice, invisible to orbital scans. They had been there for years, not 11 years. Not since humanity had joined the galactic stage. Longer, Earth had been preparing. Not for this war specifically. Earth had been preparing for the possibility of this war, the way a person living in a bad neighborhood installs locks and cameras and learns to sleep with one eye open. Not because they want trouble, because trouble does not ask permission. The factories built ships, not warships, not in the way the galaxy understood warships. These were something different, smaller, faster, carrying weapons that operated on principles the Vraxians had not encountered because the principles were not derived from Vraxian science or Vraxian physics or anything in the Vraxian database. They were derived from human physics, from human mathematics, from the particular kind of innovation that occurs when a species knows it is small and surrounded, and decides that the appropriate response is not to grow bigger, but to grow stranger. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of the UEN Remembrance, the flagship of the fleet that did not officially exist, and looked out at the assembly point where 300 ships hung in the dark like a constellation that had decided to move. 300, not the 47 world defensive fleet the galaxy knew about. That fleet was real, and it was exactly what it appeared to be. Adequate, unremarkable. The fleet the galaxy was supposed to see. This fleet was the one they were not. Chen Wei was 61 years old, thin, gray at the temples, a face that had been weathered by 30 years of military service into something that looked less like a face and more like a landscape. Ridges and valleys and the deep lines that form around the eyes of people who have spent too long looking at things they cannot change. When he held a small object in his hand, a silver circle, crushed, bent, the pin that had been taken from Alara Voss's lapel and returned with her body. He had known Alara, not well. They had met twice, once at a diplomatic function, once at a briefing where she had been told what would happen if the Vraxians rejected her terms. She had listened. She had understood. She had gone anyway. The two words she had whispered to Rourke. He knew what they were. Everyone in this room knew what they were. Rourke had delivered them personally, standing in this very room, with Alara's blood still on his uniform, his voice flat and empty and carved down to its foundations. She had said, "Don't stop." Chen Wei closed his fist around the pin. He turned to his command staff, 12 officers, each one responsible for a division of the fleet that the galaxy had spent 11 years not knowing about. They stood around the tactical table, and their faces carried the particular expression of people who have crossed a line and know they cannot cross back. "The Ninth Fleet has been neutralized," Chen Wei said. "Commander Voxen survived as planned. She is en route to Thrax's station. She will deliver our message." "And when Dravik receives it?" asked Captain Torres, his tactical operations chief. "He will do what every Vraxian commander has done for 3,000 years when faced with a problem. He will send a bigger fleet, a much bigger fleet. He will commit significant resources to crushing what he still believes is a minor threat. Why? Because his entire worldview depends on the belief that size determines outcome." Chen Wei placed the crushed pin on the tactical table. "He is wrong." "When do we move?" Torres asked. "When they come. We let them come. We let them commit. We let them extend their supply lines and spread their forces and plant their flag in the corridor and feel confident that they have the situation under control." He looked at the display. The 300 ships, the weapons that didn't follow Vraxian rules, the crews that had been training for this in the dark for a decade. "And then we go through them, and we don't stop until we reach Thrax's station." Torres looked at the pin on the table. "For the ambassador?" Chen Wei shook his head, slowly. "No, for every species in this galaxy that has ever stood on that floor and been laughed at. Oh, for every small thing that was crushed because it was small. The ambassador knew what she was doing. She bought us something with her life." "What?" "Justification." He turned back to the window. 300 ships, silent, waiting, patient in the way that deep water is patient. She gave us the right to do what we were always capable of doing, and she made sure the galaxy watched. Far away on Thrax's station, Fleet Commander Voxen's lone ship limped through the outer defense ring, damaged, scarred, the only survivor of 32. She was escorted to the council chamber. She walked to the petitioner's floor, the same floor where Alara Voss had stood, the same floor where Alara Voss had died. Dravik looked down at her. "Report." Voxen looked up at the High Commander. She looked at the council. She looked at the place on the floor where a human woman's blood had been cleaned away, but whose ghost still stood there, shaking and steady and sad. "They are coming," Voxen said. Her voice broke on the second word. "They are coming, and they are not what we thought." The Vraxian Empire had destroyed species before. It was not something they discussed at diplomatic functions, though it was not something they denied either. The destruction of a species was simply a tool, like fire, useful, occasionally necessary, not something that required moral examination any more than a surgeon examined the morality of a scalpel. The Cathani had been first, 800 years ago, a gentle silicon-based species whose crime had been occupying a star system rich in the rare minerals the Varaxian war machine consumed. They had been asked to leave, and they had refused. They had been removed. Their homeworld was now a mining colony. Their language existed only in academic databases. Their music, apparently they had created extraordinary music, was lost entirely. The Varaxians had learned something from the Cathani and from every species they had broken since. They had learned that destruction was easy when the numbers were on your side, and the numbers were always on their side, and therefore destruction was always easy. This was the foundational logic of the Varaxian Empire, and it had worked without exception for 3,000 years. Dravik was about to discover why foundations are the most dangerous thing to trust. He stood in the war room and looked at Voxan, who stood on the floor below him. Its sensors could not locate the source. Our sensors could not locate the source. Our targeting systems could not lock. Our shields could not calibrate because they could not identify the energy type. New technology, not new the way we use the word, not an improvement on existing systems. Something entirely different. Something that does not operate on the same principles as anything in our database. Dravik's lower arms crossed behind his back. His upper arms rested at his sides. Four-armed body language was complex, and this particular configuration meant he was processing something that required all of his attention and none of his emotion. How many ships did they deploy? Unknown. Estimate. I cannot estimate what I could not detect, High Commander. Korath, standing in the corner, let out a sound that was half growl, half calculation. She panicked. The fleet encountered an ambush, possibly mines, possibly stealth drones, and she panicked and lost 32 ships to a trap that a competent commander would have. I lost 32 ships in 97 seconds. Voxan's voice cut through the room like something with a blade. She turned to Korath, and her scales had gone the color of old iron, and her eyes held something that Korath had never seen in them before, because he had never seen it in any Varaxian before. It was humility, the forced, broken kind that comes not from wisdom, but from having been shown, with absolute clarity, the exact dimensions of your own irrelevance. 97 seconds, Fleet Admiral. I timed it. From the first shot to the last, 97 seconds. 4 dreadnoughts, 28 support vessels, 12,000 crew, 97 seconds. I did not panic. There was not enough time to panic. The war room absorbed this. Dravik turned back to the display. The map of the galaxy, the blue of Varaxian space, the gray smudge of human territory, the black void of the Kepler corridor where 2 fleets had gone to die. Mobilize the Grand Fleet, he said. Korath straightened. High Commander? The Grand Fleet. All of it. Every dreadnought, every carrier, every warship capable of faster-than-light travel. Pull them from patrol routes. Pull them from border defense. Pull them from the occupation garrisons. I want every ship we own pointed at human space within 14 days. That would leave our borders undefended. Our borders are not under threat. The humans are. High Commander, if the other species see our borders undefended, they will do nothing. They never do anything. They watch. They wait. They write concerned letters through diplomatic channels. This is what prey does, Korath. It hides and hopes the predator is busy with something else. Dravik's eyes locked onto the gray smudge. We are going to be very busy. The Grand Fleet assembled. It was the largest military mobilization in Varaxian history, a statement that carried weight when your history stretched back 3 millennia and included the subjugation of 62 species, 412 warships, 87 dreadnoughts, 30 carriers, with 200,000 crew, enough firepower to sterilize a star system, enough soldiers to occupy a civilization. They gathered at the edge of the Kepler corridor, like a storm building on the horizon, and their presence was felt across the galaxy the way earthquakes are felt. Not as a local event, but as a tremor that runs through the floor and reminds everyone standing on it that the floor is not as solid as they believed. Trade Minister Yelik watched the fleet movements from his office on Torvathi Prime and felt all 8 of his legs go cold. They've pulled everything, he said to Bryn. Border garrisons, patrol fleets, the occupation forces in the Alani system, everything. For the humans. For the humans. Bryn processed this. The humans have 47 colony worlds. Yes. The Grand Fleet could destroy 47 worlds in a week. Yes. Then why does this feel wrong? Yellick looked at her. In the decades he had known Bryn, she had never asked a question that did not have a number attached to it. This question had no number. It had a feeling, and feelings were not Torvathi currency. Because, he said, the humans knew this would happen. They destroyed 2 fleets. They knew the response would be the Grand Fleet. They knew the Varaxians would mobilize everything. A species that has been on the galactic stage for 11 years does not pick a fight with the largest empire in the galaxy unless they have already calculated the outcome. What outcome? Yellick said nothing. The Grand Fleet entered the Kepler corridor on the 15th day, when Dravik commanded from the bridge of the Imperial Sovereign, the largest warship ever built by any species. 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack moons, carrying a crew of 8,000. He had given one order: destroy everything human, not occupation, not subjugation, destruction. The humans had forfeited their right to exist as a galactic species when they destroyed 2 Varaxian fleets. This was not punishment, it was pest control. The corridor was empty, as before, dark, silent. The pulverized remains of the 4th and 9th fleets drifted in clouds of metallic dust that caught the distant starlight and glittered. Dravik looked at the glitter and felt something he had not felt in a century: doubt. He crushed it. He had crushed doubt before. It was a reflex. Formation Alpha, he ordered. Full sensor sweep. I want every cubic kilometer of this corridor mapped before we advance. The fleet spread out. 412 ships casting their sensors into the dark like fishermen casting nets, searching for the invisible thing that had killed their kin. They found nothing. For 6 hours, they found nothing. The corridor was empty. No ships, no weapons platforms, no mines, no stealth drones. Nothing. They've retreated, Korath said. He was aboard the Imperial Sovereign, standing at Dravik's shoulder, and his voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had decided to be right, because being wrong was not something he was willing to afford. They struck from ambush, and now they have retreated to their colonies. Classic prey behavior, hit and run. Dravik did not respond. High Commander, our sensor sweep is complete. With the corridors clear, we should advance to the first human colony world. Dravik looked at the display, the corridor, the stars, the dark. They let Voxan live, he said. Korath blinked. What? 32 ships, 12,000 crew, all destroyed, except Voxan. 1 ship, 1 commander, left alive. Why? To send a message. Yes, but what message? Not fear. If they wanted fear, they would have destroyed everything and let the silence speak for itself. They left a witness. They wanted us to know what they could do. They wanted us to come. The bridge officers looked at each other. They wanted us to bring the Grand Fleet, Dravik said. They wanted every ship we have in one place. The realization moved through the bridge like a cold wind. High Commander, it's a trap. Alarms. Every alarm on every ship. Simultaneously. A sound so vast and so layered that it became something beyond sound. A physical pressure, a vibration in the bones. They came from everywhere. Not from the corridor, not from ambush positions, from fold space. A method of faster-than-light travel that the Varaxians had theorized about, but never achieved because the energy requirements were beyond anything their physics could produce. The humans had not only solved the physics, they had weaponized it. 300 ships materialized in a sphere around the Grand Fleet. Not in front of it, not behind it, around it. A shell of warships that enclosed 412 Varaxian vessels in a bubble of coordinated death. The human ships were smaller than Varaxian dreadnoughts, less than half the size. But they moved with a synchronization that was not military, it was mathematical. Each ship occupied a precise position in the sphere, and together they formed a geometry that turned the corridor into a kill box with no exits. Weapons free, Dravik roared. All ships engage. The Grand Fleet opened fire. 412 ships unleashing everything they had in every direction. Plasma bolts, kinetic impactors, particle beams. The corridor turned into a storm of energy so bright that the optical sensors on every ship burned out simultaneously and had to switch to secondary systems. They hit nothing. The human ships moved, not dodging. There was nothing reactive about their movements, nothing that suggested they were responding to incoming fire. They moved the way the parts of a clock move, each ship shifting position in perfect coordination with every other ship, and the Varaxian fire passed through spaces that had contained targets a fraction of a second earlier and struck only darkness. Then the human ships fired back. The beams were the same as before, the unknown energy type that did not register on Varaxian sensors and could not be blocked by Varaxian shields. But this time, there were 300 sources instead of an unknown few, and they fired not in volleys, but in a continuous, sustained, interlocking pattern that covered every angle and left no gap. The Grand Fleet began to die, not in 97 seconds this time. The humans were taking their time. Dravik would realize later, much later in the cold hours of his survival, that they were being precise. When they were not trying to destroy the fleet as fast as possible, they were dismantling it. Engines first, then weapons, then shields. Each ship was being systematically stripped of its ability to fight, to flee, and to function in that order. It was not combat, it was surgery. Dreadnoughts, the pride of the Varaxian Navy, each one crewed by thousands, each one carrying enough firepower to flatten a civilization, went dark one after another. Their engines cut out, their weapons went dead, their shields collapsed. They drifted, intact but powerless, like insects pinned to a board. "They're not destroying us," Voxan said. She was on the bridge of her repaired ship, watching through a display that showed her own fleet being taken apart with the care of someone disassembling a machine they intended to study. "Hey, they're disabling us." Dravik heard her over the fleet channel. He stood on the bridge of the Imperial Sovereign and watched his empire's military might be reduced to floating metal in the time it took to eat a meal. "Why?" he said. No one answered. The answer came 2 hours later, when the last Varaxian ship went dark and the corridor fell silent, and the 300 human ships held their positions in their perfect sphere and waited. A channel opened, all frequencies unencrypted. "High Commander Dravik, this is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy." Dravik stood on a dead bridge. No power, no weapons, no engines. Emergency lighting cast everything